What an honor it is to be standing behind this lectern here where Dr. King himself had the honor of speaking once, and for me to have this privilege of giving you this talk. In 1964, when he received the Nobel Prize, one of the stanzas in his acceptance speech said this: "I accept this award today with an abiding faith in America and an audacious faith in the future of mankind. I refuse to accept despair as the final response to the ambiguities of history. I refuse to accept the idea that the isness of man's present nature makes him morally incapable of reaching up for the eternal oughtness that forever confronts him. I refuse to accept the idea that man is mere flotsam and jetsam in a river of life, unable to influence the unfolding events which surround him. I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war that the bright daybreak of peace and brotherhood could never become a reality. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. I refuse to believe that man is mere flotsam and jetsam in a river of life. I refuse to believe that we are so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war that the bright daybreak of peace and brotherhood can never become a reality. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. I often have thought, in fact, I ponder many times when I'm crisscrossing the globe and see some other tragedies, and I sit back and think of the great men and women on whose shoulders we stand, whether it be the likes of Gandhi or the likes of Dr. King himself, many others who have fought so hard for preserving dignity and civility, even in the intensity of things that really divide us. What would Dr. King have said looking at the vitriol in our time? I recall speaking last year this very month to a group of journalists in Washington. And a woman came up to me afterwards and said, "I have spent 30 years in the State Department. 30 years. She said, "I have never seen the mood so toxic as it is now." She said, "Ravi, it's unbelievable all that has happened in just a few years and in one generation, when the mood is so toxic. How do we treat each other through our disagreements? How do we convey truth to one another in a civil manner, realizing that we may have deep-seated differences?" I happened to have make a quick overnight stop in Orlando on my way here from Atlanta because my grandchildren were vacationing and enjoying Disney World and so on. And so I took a few of the rides in there, sitting next to my 5-year-old grandson, wondering what kind of a world he will be seeing maybe 20 years from now. And as we were going through that beautiful ride, it's a small world after all. You know, it's a beautiful ride, but that melody stays with you all night long. You can't go to sleep if no, you're muttering away at that. And then to watch him just marvel at all that science and technology has done. One of those was called soaring. You just sit and watch the spectacular display of technology. And I had to hold on to his hand and say, "It's just imagination, Jude, it's just imagination," because those planes come flying just over your head and so on. The biggest thrill I had was in watching them have a great time. And so my question to you is, what is going to determine the difference? You know, a few days ago, Atlanta was beaten quite convincingly at the end of the game by the Patriots. What if the Falcons had said, "We want to stop the game at halftime because we're winning right now"? No, that's not the way the game is played. It's played with 4 quarters. It's played with rules. And what I fear now in America's history, we are trying to change the rules, and we face possibly a dire outcome if we don't live by the rules again. Laws were given for a reason, to give us boundaries of behavior. But the Christian message tells us something beyond laws when it talks about grace and truth. And so I want to present to you as quickly as I can what it is that the Christian worldview gives to you and to me about what it means to be human. 3,000 years ago, David said this: "When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, or the son of man that you care for him? You've made him a little lower than heavenly beings, but you've crowned him with glory and honor." It's an incredible statement made 3 millennia ago by the sweet singer of Israel, who wrote in the Psalms on the glory and the majesty of the created order and that supreme expression in what we call humanity. What is there in man that you're mindful of him, or the Son of Man that you visit him? I want to give you 4 simple truths that the Judeo-Christian worldview presents about what it means to be human. 1 or 2 of them will be repetitive, but hopefully we will also get beyond that. Number 1 is that the Bible talks of a designation, or if you wish, a creation. That there is a designation, there is a designed order to who you and I are. You see, it was, I think, Chesterton who said, "You and I can sit and revel in a sunset and pay a huge compliment to how beautiful the sunset is, but the sun will never return the compliment. It'll never look at you and me and talk about the capacity to behold and the marvel and the wonder and all that comes together in truth, wonder, love, security, all these components with which you and I live and for which you and I long." When you see the designation or the creation, the first thing you see is this: there is an intrinsic worth to your life. That worth is not given by the United Nations. It's not given by the state. It's not given by the government. It's given by the very designated and created order that you and I have not extrinsic worth, but intrinsic worth. Hence the difference in cultures today, where some nations actually believe that the value of an individual is conveyed by those who are in power. That's not what the Bible reminds you and me. It reminds us that we are made with such essential worth, intrinsic worth. There are 2 extraordinary conversations that Jesus had, which points this out. The first one is the conversation that he is asked to define the laws and which is the greatest commandment. And the greatest commandment had to be reduced from 613 laws. Moses gave 613 laws, and the questioners of the law are trying to trip him up, whether it's going to be law against law, religion against religion. Can you tell us which is the greatest commandment? When Moses gave 613, Isaiah reduced it to 15. David reduced it to 11. Micah reduced it to 3, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before your God. Jesus is now being asked to reduce it to 1. It amazes me that he could have, but he didn't. He looked at him and he said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your mind and all your soul and all your strength. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself." He said, on these 2 laws hang all of the laws and the prophets. On these 2 commandments hang all of the laws and the prophet. Why did he give 2? Because of the first, the second necessarily follows. Without the first, the second is with its feet firmly planted in midair. You love the Lord your God, and you love your neighbor as yourself. Why is that so? In that second conversation, now they try to trip him up, political power against political power. And they looked at him and he said, and the man said to him, the lawyer said to him, "Is it all right to pay taxes to Caesar?" How nice it would have been if Jesus had said no. Then come April 15th, you can be both religious and rebellious at the same time and pay the price for it. Jesus said to him, "Do you have a coin?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Give me that coin." Jesus took the coin in his hand and showed it to the man. He said, "Whose image do you see on this coin?" The man said, "Caesar." Jesus said, "Give to Caesar that which is Caesar's, and give to God that which is God's." the man should have had a comeback question and said, what belongs to God? Jesus would have said, whose image is on you? That trip-up question failed because they saw what Jesus actually said, even with his antagonist, you are made imago Dei. No other worldview gives you this compliment. You are not God. No, you are not the devil either. There's a Hindi song that anybody Hindi speaking here says, Na main bhagwan hu, na main shaitan hu, duniya jo chaho samjhe, main to insaan hu. I'm not God. I'm not the devil. You can choose what you want. I am a human being. Song says it. You're not God. Neither are you Satan. You're a human being. Well, the Bible tells us what it means to be human. There is intrinsic worth. I remember being in Chiang Mai in Thailand some years ago. I was visiting a house for those who had contracted Down syndrome at birth, and my daughter had gone to see if we could do a project out there. There was a little boy there called T-U, and he was doing some paintings. If anybody else had done it, you wouldn't take a second look at it. But he's doing some paintings. And there he was working away with the brush. And you know what the teacher told me? I forget, it happened some years ago. Something like this was his 11th or 13th painting. And people come from all over the world and they buy Tu's painting. You see, he knew that his mother had taken care of him, put him in this home, came to visit him every day, brought him his lunch, did all kinds of things. And when the first painting sold for a hefty amount of money, he took that money in a bag and gave it to his mother and said, without you, I would not have made it. I stood next to the boy and I said, will somebody please take a picture of me with this boy? He's a hero. His heart knew value and what it meant to have intrinsic worth from another human being. My grandson Jude is 5. I've told this story many times, and out of the mouth of babes, says the Bible, you will hear, you have ordained praise. One day my daughter Naomi, his mother, lost her car keys, and she couldn't search and search. She slapped her forehead and said, I'm losing my mind. And he was 3.5 years old at that time. Jude came and stood in front of her and said, Mommy, whatever you do, please don't ever lose your heart because I'm in there. A child who learns value and intrinsic worth. That's what the Bible says to you and me. You are not the random collocation of atoms. You're not an accidental blip on the radar screen of time. God has given to you essential and intrinsic worth, and I have no right to violate you because you are created imago Dei. Intrinsic worth, but so it is, there is a reflective splendor. How God manages this is absolutely remarkable by introducing the notion of the family and love between our fellow human beings. He moves this from the cosmic setting to the individualized privilege and prerogative. What do I mean by that? The fact of the matter is, while you and I share the image of God, you have a distinctive uniqueness where your relationships give you the privilege of a kind of love that they cannot give to everybody else. You are in a relationship with that privileged love. I remember some years ago, my son who went to Taylor University in Upland, Indiana, some years ago, there was a terrible accident on a Sunday night with students coming back from the weekend. And an 18-wheeler or something crossed the median and smashed into this van where many of the students were. And all of them were killed, I believe, except for one. And the parents were informed. They came and conducted the funeral and everything for each one of them. But the one girl that survived was a girl called Laura Van Ryn. And so they informed the Van Ryn family to come and take care of their daughter. She was smashed up, banged up, beyond recognition. And the Van Ryn family stood around that bed, day after day, night after night, and I'm not 100% sure how it went, but I think her boyfriend was also there. And the more of the days went by when he asked questions, He looked at the parents and said, something is wrong. She's not answering these questions properly. And the father got exasperated and said, what is the matter with you? She's been hit. She's been so sidelined for some time. Just give her. He said, no, something is wrong. Finally, one day, she looked up from her pillow and looked at them and said, why do you keep calling me Laura? I am not Laura. I am Whitney. I am Whitney Sirac. Parents were shaken by this, called the president's office, said, was there a young woman by the name of Whitney Sirac in that van? Said, yes. Well, your coroner has made a mistake. The girl that we've thought is our daughter lying in this bed is not Laura at all. This is Whitney Sirac. You better call the coroner right now and get this thing straightened out. Well, the girl was right, and the coroner lost his job. He'd not done any of the DNA testing that was needed. And he told the parents of the Van Ryn family, this is your daughter Laura. It wasn't. Whitney Sirac was finally released, but you can imagine the trauma. The girl who was buried as Whitney Sirac was actually Laura Van Ryn. The parents had to go to the grave, change the grave, the marker. The parents who thought they had buried Whitney came and stood by her side. There's a distinctive and particularity to your life that God reminds you and me is never lost in the sea of humanity. And what he cares about you as an individual is a unique Christian gift with the particularity of your value. Many of you may not even know this. I was 17 years old in Delhi when I tried to take my own life. I had never opened a Bible in my life. Never gave God any serious thought. A man walked in with a Bible and wanted to read it to me. My mother wouldn't allow him to read it. I was in critical condition. They didn't expect me to live. The poison that I put into my system was expected to work and literally take my life within a few days. But as that scripture was read to me, never having opened the Bible, and the Bible verse that was read to me was from John 14:19. Jesus said, because I live, you also shall live. And I just muttered the prayer of a desperate man. I said, I don't know what all this means. I really don't know who you are. But if you know what life is all about, I don't. I want the life that you can give to me. I stand before you today as a 70-year-old man. 53 years ago, God changed my life by reminding me that he cared for me as an individual and pursued me all the way to that hospital bed. I never dreamed of the day that I'd be standing in front of audiences all over the world telling them what it really means to live. Intrinsic worth and a reflective splendor. Secondly, and quickly, there's an incarnation. From the designation or creation to the incarnation, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us full of grace and truth. I don't have the time to go into this, but I want you to remember this. Truth is a powerful and the most valuable thing in the world, but uncoupled with grace, it can become merciless and cruel. Uncoupled with grace, it can become merciless and cruel. And the grace of the Christian gospel is so unique. When you read the prodigal son's story, the boy comes back after squandering all of the inheritance. And the amazing thing about that story is what happens next. It is not so much that he comes and falls into the house at his father's feet, but the father leaves the home and goes to meet him outside there. That was grace, mercy, kindness, and love. All of us need that grace sometimes, especially when we've blundered hard and long and made huge mistakes. In the incarnation, the grace that was offered. I was doing an open forum in Damascus, Syria, and the leading Shia sheikh there by the name of Sheikh Hussein was a very kind gentleman. We dialogued for 3 hours. Between us, the interpreter. He would ask me a question about my faith, I would answer it. I would ask him a question about his faith, he would answer it. And an audience was listening in. He always graciously addressed me as professor, professor, professor. In the last moment when it all was coming to an end, he totally surprised me. When he looked at me and he said, Professor, I think I have to say something to you. It's time for us to stop asking if Jesus died on the cross and to start asking why. Soon the Shia cleric, Sheikh Hussein in Damascus, the leading Shia. I said, "Sir, do I have your permission to quote you?" He said, "Yes." He said, "It's something we need to think about. And that's why the hymn writer says, 'What language shall I borrow to thank you, dearest friend, for this thy dying sorrow, thy pity without end? O make me thine forever, and should I fainting be, Lord, let me never, never outlive my love for thee.'" See, the church has been guilty of showing very little grace. And Christendom, when it was in political power, did not set a good example. I just ask you to do one thing. Don't judge Jesus by what you've seen in the church. Whenever religion becomes politicized, it destroys both politics and religion. The choice to follow by faith is a freedom for you to choose or not to choose. This is the uniqueness of America. We are given the freedom to believe or to disbelieve. We are given the freedom to believe or to disbelieve. Faith that is born, that is engendered within you, can never be coerced. It will not be that trust and that belief, because it's wrapped into love and truth, and the choice is that sacred trust God gives to you. So you've got the designation, the incarnation. I'll just mention one more. Thirdly, transformation. The Bible talks about the transformation of the human heart, how God is able to change the heart of an individual and change it from hate to love and from anger to mercy and grace. I will just give you one illustration of this and mention my fourth thought and be seated. I've had the privilege of going to Angola prison in Baton Rouge, Louisiana several times, and it's about 20 miles out of there. It was the most deadly prison in America. There were over 5,000 prisoners there, 85% of whom are on life without parole, and about 40 or 50 of them are on death row. My colleagues sitting here, Abdu and 2 or 3 others sitting there, have all had the privilege of going there together with them. We've stood on the other side of the bars talking to people in death row. Abdu had the privilege, I had the privilege of speaking at their chapel and talking to them about Christ. The chaplain who came there some years ago with the girth of a southern sheriff, ample walk, walked in there and he said, "I can change this prison." It was the bloodiest prison, as I said. When you checked in, they gave you a knife to defend yourself. When he became the warden, there was blood on the carpets, blood on the ceiling, blood on the walls. He said, "Allow me to do this my way, please." He put Bibles in every cell. He held chapel every day, opened a theological seminary in there for them to be able to get a degree, and began to work with them in ways that would give them the truth about Christ's love for them. And they were free to come to chapel if they wanted to or not. The place became packed. The first time I spoke there, I saw the prisoners leading in worship. It was amazing. None of them are allowed to leave those confines. At the end of it, one of the men who was leading in worship looked to me like a man in his 30s. I said to him, "Will you allow me to ask you a pretty blunt question?" He said, "Sure." I said, "Are you here on life without parole?" He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "So you'll never get out of here?" He said, "No, sir." I said, "You see the dogs out there? They'll follow you within minutes of you leaving out here. We are 20 miles away from the nearest road." I said, "How does it feel?" He said, "Mr. Zacharias, I want to tell you something. If you knew what I did and why I am here, you would never ask me that question that way. Sir, for the first time in my life, I am free. Because out here, I found Jesus Christ who changed my heart. And I'm delighted to spend the rest of my life behind these prison bars because of the freedom that I now have inside me." He said, "Pray for my parents. They